On the military front, Washington is considering sending 30,000 extra troops to Iraq in an effort to try to stabilize the country. Some military analysts believe a big showdown is looming as US President George Bush seems determined to crush the power of the sectarian militias. There are also fears that an increased US troop presence may represent a bigger and easier target for Iraq's insurgents. On the political front, President Bush appears to be following the recommendations of his close advisors by seeking to engineer a grand coalition of Sunnis willing to work with the United States, Shiites and Kurds. Broad agreement between these communities might help Iraq emerge from its turmoil. But the situation is not helped by these groups often being at odds with each other. Such military and political plans also need to take into account the influence of Iran. Tehran's role and influence in Iraq is pivotal. The Iraqi government and Washington will need to maneuver carefully through these political and military minefields. Sami Zaidan, Al Jazeera.
To discuss the new American plan to stabilize Iraq, I am joined from Washington by Neil Rosen, who has written extensively on the American presence in Afghanistan and Iraq. Mr. Rosen, Saddam's execution makes for clearing of the political deck in Iraq, as if the United States is receiving a blank canvas. What is next?
Well, Saddam was never a candidate for re-election. He wasn't going to be restored to power. So really it was his removal from power that cleared the slate 4 years ago. So the execution changes nothing. You have a civil war in Iraq, and the civil war is not going to end merely because you've executed one leader or another. There are no real leaders for the various parties that are fighting. It's local militias. So what's going to happen next is more of the same. 100, 200 dead bodies every day, ethnic and sectarian cleansing, further destabilization of Iraq.
The United States, in the person of President Bush, is trying to change that formula. President met with several Iraqi leaders in Washington in order to create what they called the Grand Coalition. Do you see a Grand Coalition coming into being?
I see a grand demolition. I think Iraq is being destroyed, and there's nobody who can fix it. He met a variety of leaders, the head of the Islamic Party, Vice President Abdulaziz al-Hakim, head of the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq, people who have absolutely different views. I think the Americans are under the impression that they're like the British imperialists and they can move pieces around and play the Iraqis, whereas in fact it's the Americans who are being played by the Iraqis. The Americans are under the impression that they have influence in Iraq, whereas in fact they're just one more militia among the many militias. And the idea that the Americans who have destabilized Iraq can now stabilize it would be humorous if it wasn't so tragic because of the consequences to Iraqis.
These fractures and diverse group that you alluded to, perhaps they will be combined and coalesce around a specific goal.
I don't think so, because their goals are very different. There's basically a Shia plan that's being made real to empty Baghdad of Sunnis. Neighborhood by neighborhood, businesses are being attacked, homes are being destroyed, and of course Sunnis are doing the same thing to Shias. At this point it's a war for survival, an attempt to wipe out the other side, and Baghdad is really the focal point for this. And you're going to see Sunnis pushed more and more to the west. I think it's a tragic but inevitable trajectory. There will be no Sunnis left in Baghdad, and as a result you'll see greater support for Sunni militias from Jordan, from Saudi Arabia, but the two sides cannot agree on anything.
President Bush, the way he phrased it, this coalition they are trying to put together is the coalition of the moderates in order to isolate the extremists. Perhaps they were referring to Muqtada al-Sadr.
Well, the Americans like these black and white sort of explanations for things, moderates, extremists. It's hard for me to imagine how one can describe Abdulaziz al-Hakim, head of the Supreme Council for the Islamic Revolution in Iraq, as a moderate. Islamic Revolution in Iraq. I don't see anything moderate about his program. I don't see anything moderate about the fact that he controls thousands of militiamen, the Badr Corps, who are engaged in the civil war, who are acting as death squads. Likewise, the various Sunni parties are also struggling for survival and struggling to eradicate Shias in their neighborhoods. This dichotomy of moderate extremists, I mean, the Americans like doing that in the Middle East. They like calling their friends moderates and their opponents extremists. And it's certainly true that in Iraq you have a whole variety of extremists, but I think all the moderates have fled. The moderates are fleeing Iraq in the thousands every single day, and the only people left are the extremists.
This American plan, in your view, betrays lack of knowledge about Iraq, or is it perhaps a certain machination in order to isolate the extremists one at a time? Let us start with Muqtada Sadr, and then later on we will think about Syria.
I think that's possible, but even that would betray a lack of American understanding of Iraq. The idea that the Americans can influence events in Iraq in a positive way is naive in the extreme, or arrogant in the extreme. I don't know. Perhaps both in this case. They cannot isolate Muqtada Sadr. He's one of the most popular, if not the most popular leaders in Iraq. They would have to isolate him and the millions of followers that he has in much of Iraq. They cannot isolate the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq. These are the parties that won the elections. How can you isolate them? Who are you going to have left? You cannot. They follow their leaders.
The isolation I was referring to, Mr. Rosen, is predicated on the fact that these powerful figures, they have militias, and that is runs contrary to what the Iraqi government, at least ostensibly, stands for, or the United States will allow, since it has 150,000 soldiers in Iraq.
That's true. Officially, of course, they're opposed to militias, although they've been working with them from the beginning. But it'll be very difficult to isolate, for example, the Mahdi army, because it's not an official militia with a hierarchy, with salaries and things like that, really. It's anybody who follows Muqtada Sadr can declare himself a member of the Mahdi army. And they are the police. I mean, the Iraqi police are dominated by the Mahdi army. Much of the army is as well. So if you isolate them, you have no police as well.
Since they are fractured, and many of them, they have debased themselves into criminal activities, to what extent the President Bush, as well as Tony Blair, they are throwing more forces into a losing battle?
It's a lost battle. I think they lost Iraq on April 9th, 2003 when they won the war. Iraq became immediately controlled by various militias who control it to this day. So throwing more troops into Iraq means that you're going to have more of your troops killed, you're going to have more resistance to those troops, and you're going to have more of those troops oppressing innocent Iraqis as well. The solution to the occupation is not a greater occupation. It's a withdrawal of the occupation.
Is the onus on the Americans and the British, or is the onus on the Iraqi government in the person of Maliki?
Well, given that the Americans are really the ones in charge here, the onus perhaps is on them. I don't think either Maliki or the Americans have any real power. The real power is not in the green zone in Baghdad. Real power is on the streets of Iraq in various neighborhoods. It lies in the hands of militiamen. I wouldn't look to Bush or to Maliki for the solution here. I don't think there is a solution. I think tragically this is sort of a cycle of violence that cannot be stopped at this point and will last for years. But the Americans are really the ones in control. Iraqi police, Iraqi army cannot operate without the Americans say so. When Americans and Iraqi soldiers go on joint operations, the Americans search the Iraqi soldiers for cell phones because they don't trust them. So really, the Americans are the ones who still are, at least officially, in charge of Iraq.
Mr. Rosen, in military jargon, there is a phrase, quantity has a quality all of its own. If the Americans are going to send another 30,000 just to stabilize Baghdad, currently they have only 17,000. That's basically, there's going to be 50,000. Why more forces would not add up to security, while in fact, in the past, we said Donald Rumsfeld committed a grave mistake by not sending enough forces?
Well, there was a point in time when perhaps more forces would have worked. During the war, they would have been able to establish full control over Iraq, perhaps. But they surrendered control of Iraq to this coalition, to this diverse militias and tribal militias and clerical militias and criminal gangs. And now it's just too late. 30,000 troops in Baghdad won't have any effect because what will they do? I mean, they don't speak Arabic. They are lost. One day they attack Sunnis, one day they attack Shias. And Iraqis are united in opposition to the occupation, whether they're Sunni or Shia. They're all calling for the occupation to end. So I think the Americans really are the problem in Iraq. It's the American occupation that provoked the civil war. It's the American occupation that provoked the resistance. Increasing the occupation will only increase the resistance to it.
The Capitol building is behind you. The newcomers, they're going to assume power in about a few weeks from now, the Democrats. To what extent they will put stringent conditions on the president? Is he racing against time? How much time does he have in order to leave perhaps with saving face?
I think the era of saving face for Bush in Iraq is long over. But I think that the Democrats have no alternative policy. They're just as confused. You have some of them calling for more troops, some of them calling for less troops, but nobody can offer a solution. And nobody says what has to be said, that there is no solution, that the U.S. has destroyed Iraq, that this is not like Rwanda, where we can say the Hutus and Tutsis, I apologize, are fighting each other, and we have no responsibility. We are the ones, the U.S., that created the civil war in Iraq. We are responsible for it. It's on the conscience of Americans who re-elected Bush. It's on the Democrats who supported the war as well. There's nothing that can be done. What you're going to see in Iraq is a slide towards the complete disintegration of the country and the regionalization of the civil war. And I guess Bush just hopes that he can pass this on to the next president, and he will appear to be the one who went down fighting at least. And the next guy is going to be the one who had to withdraw the troops in shame.
The elephant in the room is Iran. There is a battle going on Iraq between the Iranians and the Americans. Is this perhaps the beginning of American withdrawal from the region?
I think certainly as a result of the catastrophe in Iraq, American influence in the region is at its weakest. So you do see perhaps a greater influence for Syria and Iran. I don't think this is a negative thing. I don't think that you can say Iran controls Iraq, or this is a battle between America and Iran. This is a battle between Iraqis. Iran has some influence, this is true, but the parties in the civil war in Iraq are Iraqis, and they're fighting an Iraqi civil war to determine who is a real Iraqi, who should control Iraq and its resources. And Iran has influence, just as do many other countries. Saudi Arabia has a great deal of influence. Jordan does as well, over some of the Sunni militias. The Turks...
There is a difference, Mr. Rosen, between political influence and perhaps tribal connections and actual putting assets on the ground. We just saw a few days ago the Americans, they captured 5 intelligence officers. They released 3 of them. 2 perhaps they are still in custody. For the first time, the United States said, we have hard evidence that Iranian intelligence are planning of attacks and killing American soldiers.
Well, I'm very skeptical of this. I think it's hard to trust the Americans, given that this whole war was based on American lies, and that the entire occupation has been a succession of American lies and denials of reality. So why would we suddenly trust the Americans that these were intelligence agents and they were planning attacks on the Americans? It's hard for me to see why the Iranians at this point need to attack Americans when the Americans are being so successfully attacked by Iraqi Shias and Iraqi Sunnis already. I think it's perfectly reasonable to assume that all the countries in the region have intelligence agents operating in Iraq. There's a great need for that, because obviously when Iraq falls apart, the people most threatened apart from Iraqis will be Iraq's neighbors. And as everybody knows, one of America's main allies, the so-called moderate Supreme Council for the Islamic Revolution, is a very close ally of Iran. And in fact, these Iranian agents were found in, I believe, in the compound belonging to one of the leaders of the Supreme Council. So we can't on one side say that the Supreme Council is an ally, is moderate, and then arrest people who are staying in their homes. Even the Iraqi president, Jalal Talabani, a Kurd, was very upset about this, because he himself has a good relationship with Iran. So I think it's hypocritical in the extreme. I think it's just an attempt by the Americans to blame somebody else. We've been trying to blame foreign fighters, former Baathists, and now Iran is our #1 enemy in Iraq. Really, it's all a denial of the problem that the U.S. is a problem in Iraq, the occupation is a problem, the civil war is a problem, and looking for culprits in Iran or in Syria is just a distraction.
Mr. Neil Rosen, thank you very much. Joining me now from our London studio is Dilip Hero, a security expert. Mr. Hero, why is it many experts believe that security in Iraq is beyond salvation? Why are they drawing such a bleak assessment?
I think we had to go back to the root cause. You see, when the Americans invaded Iraq, it wasn't simply overthrowing Saddam Hussein and then having elections and so on. They went on to completely destroy the state machinery. Remember, as soon as the troops came in, all the public buildings, all the ministries, except oil ministry, they were burnt and looted, and the American soldiers just stood by with folded arms, you see, and that was the whole idea. And then, as you remember, the American Viceroy, Mr. Bremer, he completely dissolved all police, all military, all intelligence agencies, and so they completely destroyed the structure of the state. And remember, under Saddam Hussein and before that, Iraq was run as a very highly centralized authoritarian state, very efficient state, and having destroyed that, the Americans are not able to put it back now. That's one.
You're not saying
Secondly,
that, let me stop you for just a second. You're not saying that the Americans, they did this deliberately, or is it perhaps because of lack of knowledge?
No, the American idea was basically to completely destroy this, the state machinery, and also destroy the Baath Party and its structure, because see, they had such misconceptions. They thought as if they were fighting World War II, in which the Allies, one had a complete total surrender by Germany and Japan, and when the Allies went into post-war Germany, they did exactly what Bush and company have done in Iraq. But these are not same situations. Iraq under Saddam Hussein did not surrender completely.
Did they get a bad advice, Mr. Hero?
Sorry?
Did they get a bad advice? You're referring to the de-Baathification and linking it with the denazification that was carried out in 1945. The one person who marketed this to the president and to Donald Rumsfeld was Ahmed al-Chalabi. Are you saying that was the genesis of the current lack of security?
Absolutely. See, within the exile leaders, you had two schools of thought. One was Ahmed Chalabi school of thought. The other was Eid Alawi school of thought. And Eid Alawi was with the State Department, and Chalabi was with the Pentagon. And Chalabi's idea was what I call year zero. Destroy completely everything. De-Baathification and military, everything destroyed. Whereas Alawi's plan, along with the State Department, was make some changes at the top, because ordinary Baath Party leaders were not so involved, and make a smooth transition. And that was rejected by Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney and Bush, and they went for the Chalabi option, and then of course we have seen what's happened. So that is something which they are not able to put together. One. Two, by doing what they did, they destroyed the identity of being an Iraqi. That is another important thing. If you look at Saddam Hussein, for better or for worse, because he fought 8-year-long war with Iran, and during that war, and because of that war, he created a strong Iraqi nationalist feeling. You felt Iraqi. Even Shia Iraqis were fighting the Iranian Shias. So you see, that was also destroyed completely, and now the identity that Iraqis have, they say, I'm Shia first, then I'm Iraqi. I'm Sunni first, then I'm Iraqi. I'm Kurd first, then I'm Iraqi.
Let us sprint forward to the present,
you
where
cannot
President
have national
Bush,
institutions.
President Bush has made Iraq the central front on the war of terrorism. Today, in his statement vis-a-vis the execution of Saddam, believes that Iraq is still very important to fight international terrorism. Is that just a gimmick they are marketing?
Yes, I think, I'm sorry, the Bush lives in his own bubble. He has his own bubble, and that's his world, and he doesn't register. The only thing now he registered because his Republican Party got badly defeated on November the 7th. So a little bit has gone in there, but not enough, you see. So he has created this dream, his make-believe that he has gone into Iraq, threw over the dictator, and he's implanted Jeffersonian model of democracy, which is young democracy, everybody has to help it, etc., etc. But he doesn't understand that before his invasion, there was not one single Al-Qaeda member in Iraq. Saddam was so against the Islamic fundamentalists, he suppressed them. And now, by the account of the Iraq study group themselves have said that Iraq has become a training ground for militant Islamists and Al-Qaeda recruits and so on and so forth. So you see, Mr. Bush's logic has nothing to do with the logic that you and I understand, and he simply has created something in his head.
Having said that, Mr. Hero, that Al-Qaeda was never in Iraq, and now it has become, Iraq has become a hotbed for Al-Qaeda. There is a mini Islamic state created in the western province of Iraq. that forces the Americans to stay. That is not necessarily a recipe to depart, because if they leave, international jihadists and militants, they will simply fill the American vacuum.
Yeah, but you see, very interesting, you say jihadists, etc. You see, one simple lesson that not Bush, not even the Iraq study group under Baker and Lee Hamilton have learned, which is, when you have Muslim troops, when you have non-Muslim infidel troops in a Muslim country, you are encouraging the rise of jihadism in that country. Go back to Afghanistan, 1980s. What happened? The Soviet troops were there. Soviets were, of course, atheists. They were Europeans, and they were not Muslim. So it was in Afghanistan that you got the rise of Al-Qaeda, in which, of course, America was involved, Pakistan was involved. You see, it's the same principle. Go back to 1991 Gulf War. What happened? When the US-led coalition kicked out the Iraqis from Kuwait, 37,000 American troops were still stationed in Saudi Arabia. And that is the point at which bin Laden, who until then was a part of the Saudi establishment, he comes from a very rich family, he became alienated, and he started to attack the presence of infidel troops on the Saudi soil, and from that, out of that, we got Al-Qaeda. Now, same principle now, that simple principle, i.e., if you have tens of thousands of infidel troops in Afghanistan, in Iraq, which is 97% Muslim, you are creating jihadis.
Mr. Hero,
that's something even James Baker hasn't understood.
The former Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, said the American troops are trapped in Iraq. Are the Americans really in a catch-22? They can neither leave nor stay? No, I'm sorry. You see, this is where one has to have sense of history, which is, as you know, I published a book called Secrets and Lies, the Truest History of the Iraq War, in which I have a chronology. I'll tell you something very simple. As you know, there is a 57-member Islamic Conference organization. All the Muslim majority countries belong to that. And in April 2004, in the capital city of Malaysia, because Malaysia was the chair in Putrajaya, they said that we are prepared, we Muslim countries are prepared to give stabilizing troops in Iraq. And that idea was picked up by Eid Adha, and he discussed this idea. He went to Riyadh, he discussed this idea with Colin Powell, and Colin Powell said, yes, we would like Muslim troops, but they should be under the US command. Come on. Which Muslim leader is going to allow our troops to go under the US command? You
there were 6
asked a
countries. I can give you the
question
names.
which begs an answer. We will wait for it in the future. International security expert
see that, I'm sorry, that idea has not gone away.
International security expert Dilip Hero from London. To find out more information about the program and to send us your comment, please go to aljazeera.net/English. That's all for today. Join us next week when we will be back for more Inside Iraq.